Drug use, attempted suicide, a mother's psychological abuse. No one could argue Chapman was anything but a deeply troubled young man. Now that he'd been charged with murder, the questions facing American justice were, was he competent to stand trial, and was he legally sane? That's next. On the morning after John Lennon's murder, Mark David Chapman sat in a holding cell at the Manhattan Criminal Courts Building, waiting to be arraigned. He had not slept. He wore the same clothes he had on when he shot Lennon. They still smelled like gunpowder. Herbert Adlerberg, his court-appointed attorney, was a veteran of more than 20 insanity cases. He was certain this would be another one.
I got the impression when I interviewed this gentleman that he was not with it. He was not playing with a full deck of cards.
In court, Adlerberg requested that Chapman be taken to Bellevue Hospital to determine if he was competent to stand trial. He also wanted Chapman held under a suicide watch. The judge agreed. At Bellevue, Dr. Naomi Goldstein reported that Chapman was exhausted, depressed, and tearful at times, but did not seem suicidal. She saw no evidence of hallucinations or delusions and determined that he was competent to stand trial. Based on the findings, a court date was set for John Lennon's killer. The pressure of this highly publicized case became too much for Chapman's attorney to handle. The judge allowed him to quit 2 weeks after the arraignment.
Does getting death threats from some Looney Tunes out there. I recall one quote, if Chapman gets off, you're going to meet John Lennon.
Another lawyer, Jonathan Marks, took over. Like Adlerberg, Marks also experienced harassment, but stood by his decision to represent Chapman.
He was a very scared, soft-spoken, apparently humble young man, very articulate, spoke with a very pleasant Southern accent. It was obvious from the very first minute that the only defense to this case would be a psychiatric defense.
Marks entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. He started to develop his strategy for defending Chapman.
I think that it was in part a suicide because he believed that in killing John Lennon, the bad aspects of his personality would be killed, and what would be left would be a pure Holden Caulfield. And he also felt that after killing John Lennon, he would be free of pain. It was very bizarre and very crazy.
The prosecution planned to argue that Chapman killed Lennon for one simple reason, to become famous. That he knew what he had done was wrong, and therefore he was, by the definition of American justice, sane. A psychiatrist for the prosecution was ready to testify that Chapman knew that if he pulled the trigger, Lennon would die, and that Chapman wanted to be caught. The court would never have to weigh the insanity issue. On June 8, 1981, exactly 6 months after the murder and just 2 weeks before his trial date, Chapman, against the advice of his lawyer, changed his plea to guilty.
He reached a decision after prayer because he feels it is God's will that he accept responsibility for intentionally killing John Lennon, which is what he did.
He was afraid that the witnesses who came in to testify on his behalf would be at risk, that they would be vilified, that the many hundreds of thousands of people who were grieving John Lennon's death would come after them.
Chapman requested that his lawyer work out a deal with the prosecutor and the judge. On June 22, 1981, Chapman entered his plea, guilty of murder in the second degree. At the sentencing 2 months later, Judge Dennis Edwards gave Chapman the chance to make a statement. Wearing a bulletproof vest, Chapman slowly rose and read from The Catcher in the Rye. I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look out where they're going, I have to come out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I'd do all day. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. Judge Edwards sentenced Chapman to 20 years to life at Attica Correctional Facility. He said the maximum sentence of 25 years to life was inappropriate, since Chapman pleaded guilty. He also recommended that Chapman receive psychiatric treatment in prison.
Certainly, I was not happy with the decision. I was very saddened by it, seeing somebody basically being sent to prison, particularly in these circumstances, for life. And I really got to like Mark Chapman quite a lot.
Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, did not attend the court proceedings and refused to talk to the press about her husband's murderer. Ono had a memorial created on the site in Central Park where she and Lennon had taken their last walk together. She called it Strawberry Fields.
Thank you very much. And finally, thank you, John. This is John's memorial, and you made it happen again. Thank you.
A mosaic circle embedded into the walkway near the entrance reads simply, Imagine.
Yoko didn't want a graceland. Yoko didn't want a grave. Yoko didn't want a place where people would chisel out a piece of Jim Morrison's headstone. She wanted the thoughts to be more something from the head and the heart, not as a collector's item.
Lennon's assassin, meantime, would seek his own redemption at the Attica prison, which, like the man he killed, was loaded with symbolism from his youth. That's next. An American Justice returns with the conclusion of the John Lennon assassination. Attica Correctional Facility, where Mark David Chapman lives and where he will likely remain for the rest of his life. When John Lennon's killer first learned that he was being sent to Attica, site of the bloodiest prison revolt in U.S. history, he panicked. He knew that Lennon's first concert after immigrating to the U.S. was a benefit for Attica survivors and victims' families. He was certain he would be a marked man at the prison. But prison officials weren't about to let Chapman mix with the other inmates. He was assigned to the prison's disciplinary unit, a section where inmates, many of them notorious murderers, are kept under close supervision 23 hours a day. He was given a job as a porter, starting work every day at 6:30 a.m., cleaning floors, collecting laundry, and assisting the kitchen staff. As ordered by the judge, Chapman did receive occasional psychiatric care in the form of both counseling and drugs, but he never put much stock in it, preferring to believe that he was possessed by demons.
He has undergone a couple of episodes in which he has either withdrawn and sat in his cell for weeks and months at a time with a hood over his head, rocking back and forth, listening to rock and roll music and sort of speaking in demonic tongues.
Chapman claims that he had the last of his demons exorcised by a Baptist minister on December 8th, 1987, the 7th anniversary of Lennon's murder. The minister started with a makeshift communion, using a hamburger bun and a carton of apple juice. He told Chapman to pray and left him alone in his cell.
A genuine exorcism is a grinding inside that you can almost feel it. You can feel these entities. When you really feel them is when they're coming out.
Chapman felt healed. Since then, he has refused psychiatric treatment. He says he doesn't need it and is content to live with his remorse and his own explanation of what happened.
I was choking. I was suffocating in that nobodiness. It's still not an excuse to kill another man. And I regret it.
Chapman believes he had temporary schizophrenia at the time he stalked and killed John Lennon.
I think to an extent he found it convenient to be schizophrenic. I think that that this happens in probably more cases than we care to realize, where people commit the act of murder, that they seek the cover of madness.
Since Chapman has rejected medication or treatment, no one may ever know the true origin of his actions. But his confessed reason for killing Lennon is clear.
I killed John Lennon because I couldn't handle being a nobody anymore.
Chapman got his wish. He is one of the most infamous killers in the world. Over the years, he has received thousands of letters, mostly death threats. One anonymous writer from Royal Oak, Michigan, periodically sends Chapman letters saying, "The day you get out of prison is the day you die, bastard."
He's aware of the possibility that his own life would be ended by a John Lennon or Beatle fan if he ever left prison.
The prisoner reads all of his mail and has developed a detailed filing system, classifying letters with headings, including hate, Christian, and even nutcase. In the early 80s, Chapman wrote to the officer who arrested him, Stephen Spiro.
He wrote me approximately 4 letters from prison. And the last letter was one statement: read The Catcher in the Rye.
In the mid-80s, Chapman wrote to author J.D. Salinger to apologize. His letter said, "It's my fault. I crawled in, found my pseudo-self within these pages." Salinger did not respond. The one person who has stood by Chapman through the years is his wife, Gloria.
I'm a Christian, and I believe that forgiveness is one of the greatest things. I've always felt that I'm a very forgiving person. And I have not yet not forgiven Mark for anything he's done.
Gloria visits regularly, and the couple share 2-day conjugal visits 4 times a year. She helps her husband publish a Christian newsletter for fellow inmates. Chapman writes all of the stories. He also produces Christian videos for inmates with the help of a prison minister. Other than 3 minor infractions since 1989, Chapman is considered a model prisoner. He's up for parole in the year 2000, but his chances for release are slim.
I don't think Mark Chapman will ever see the streets again. I think he's in the same category as Sirhan for killing Robert Kennedy. It's too much of a political football.
This provides some solace for those who still mourn the loss of John Lennon.
I think it's a shame that anybody even knows the guy's name. And I certainly wouldn't want to see him free and enjoying his life again when he's taken away so much from so many people. I think he should be punished forever. Or I think he will be.
Mark believes, for whatever reason, that it is his destiny to die in prison. Mark really feels that God has forgiven him for this awful thing. And he does really feel that he's going to go to heaven when he dies.
Every year, Lennon's widow, friends, and fans commemorate John Lennon on his birthday, October 9th, not the day of his murder.
I would like us to remember and celebrate his birthday as a day of love, because he was a man of love, and because love is much needed at this time in our lives. Happy birthday, John.
When people look at the Dakota and they say, "Oh, that's where John Lennon died," and I remind them that's where John Lennon lived.
Chapman confided to his defense attorney that before he killed John Lennon, he had put together a so-called hit list of celebrities who, like Lennon, he considered to be phonies. The list included talk show host Johnny Carson, anchorman Walter Cronkite, and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And just as Chapman claimed he was inspired by The Catcher in the Rye, Other deranged fans came along, claiming they were inspired by both Chapman and the Salinger novel. John Hinckley Jr. was carrying a copy of the book when he shot and nearly killed President Reagan in 1981. And Robert John Bardo had the book with him when he stalked and murdered actress Rebecca Schaeffer in 1989. The U.S. Secret Service interviewed Chapman in 1991 as part of a study of celebrity stalkers. He told officials he thought he was Mr. Nobody until he killed the biggest somebody on Earth. I'm Bill Curtis. Join me next time for another episode of American Justice here on A&E.